We are joined today by Jessica Galo and Scott Baker from the Research Cybersecurity and Compliance team within UBC's Advanced Research Computing Services. They both bring a wealth of expertise from their work in cybersecurity and training at UBC, as well as valuable perspectives from their involvement in working groups within the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So thank you, Jessica and Scott, for leading this session for us, and I will let you take it from here.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to start off. Before we begin, we want to make a bit of an announcement. So it's our pleasure to unveil our new honor. It's so prestigious, so universally coveted that it has achieved universal fame, even though it's brand new. It is called the Research Cybersecurity Enthusiast Award, aka RCE. And that's how we get attention of cybersecurity folks with intentional initialism collisions. This illustrious prize is awarded to the department and individual that demonstrate unmatched dedication by attending the most research cybersecurity presentations throughout the award period. So be sure to record your attendance for a chance at becoming the inaugural recipient of this award, which we're going to bestow during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is October, and help us turn RCE into something coveted rather than feared. And for those that don't know, RCE in cybersecurity terms stands for a remote code execution, and it's about the worst thing that you can have happen to you. So there's going to be more information about this on our website. All things not in jest. The idea here is that any individual who attends the most of our sessions, whoever that is, will win this, and then there's a slightly larger one that goes to the department, and we'll just track that ourselves. So that's a little announcement before we get going. I think Jess has got the link in the chat. Perfect. We'll call attention to it once more right at the end, just so you remember. And if you miss it, we'll get that over with the slides and stuff so that you can get it later. Please don't share that link, of course. It's only supposed to be for people who are attending. I will now pass it back over to Jess, who's going to start things off for us.
All right, thanks, Scott. And yeah, a reminder again, it's the link to the award survey is in the chat. So have a look at that. So for today, we've got a three-part agenda for you. Part one is we'd like to talk about the research cybersecurity services that are available to you as part of the UBC research community. And then part two, we'd like to have hopefully an interactive discussion with you all as you bring up your research use cases and examples. And then Scott and I can talk about the cybersecurity and privacy considerations surrounding those. And then we'd like to end the session with a little bit of tips and tricks to improve your cybersecurity hygiene. So this is us. We're the Research Cybersecurity and Compliance team, and we're from the UBC Advanced Research Computing. You might know some of the typical ARC services like our HPC, Sockeye, our object storage, Chinook. But we also do have research cybersecurity services that you can avail of through our team. And we'll talk more about what those services are in the next few slides. But before we get there, let's talk about our scope. So we do research cybersecurity and compliance. And so if you've got questions about, is my research tool secure? What are the privacy and cybersecurity considerations that I have to think about when using this tool or operating this tool? You're developing a tool. What are the requirements? What are UBC requirements? We can help you with those types of questions. Our services are available to you as part of the UBC research community. If you've got a UBC research project, you don't have to already have a ARC allocation, or you don't need to be using ARC Sockeye or Chinook in order to avail of our services. You can come to us with any tool that you want to use, and we can help you talk through the cybersecurity and privacy considerations surrounding those. What's not in scope is research security. So when I think about research security, I think about your grant requirements and national security. So if you are wanting to do research with an individual from a different country in a different institution, is that going to be a national security risk? Is there an issue with your the process surrounding that, or if you want to go to that country yourself and do some sensitive research over there, what are the considerations you need? Or if you are developing a tool, is that tool a sensitive technology? Those questions, the research security team at UBC can help you answer those. If you want to use a tool for your teaching and learning, the Learning Technology Innovation Center, or LTIC, can help you with that. If it's a tool used for administration, enterprise, it's a different group, again, that's going to help you with that or assess that. It's likely the cybersecurity team. But when you're using a tool for teaching and learning or administration, it is likely that you will need a privacy impact assessment, especially if you're looking at data about students or employees. And in that case, the PIA team will be able to help you with that. We don't do PIAs, but we collaborate with them. In fact, we collaborate with all these different groups at UBC, and I won't go through how that collaboration looks like with each of these groups, but just know that we don't really act in isolation at UBC. Okay, so for our services, this really is a summary slide of the services that we offer. So we do training and awareness, such as these types of sessions. We have a compliance or security compliance checklist on our website. And really, this second box here should be compliance checklist and other, because we regularly update our website with some tools that researchers could use. For example, we've got a storage finder tool on our website. We also have a data classification supplementary material on our website to give you more information about kind of the research data and how that kind of relates to the UBC Information Security Standard U1, so requirements for classifying your data. But for the purposes of the session, we're just going to talk about the compliance checklist. We also do consultations, and we do SSPs and STRAs. And I know that's kind of two acronyms there, but we'll expound on that in future slides. For training, and really for all of our services, you can access those through arc.ubc, going through the arc.ubc.ca website and going through the security and privacy tab. Specifically for training, go to arc.ubc.ca, go to the security and privacy tab, and click on training and presentations. And here you'll see the list of presentations that we already have a ready-made slide deck for. And so we can provide this presentation to you in quite a short turnaround time. If you find something of interest, click request this presentation. If you have a topic that's not in there right now, you could still post that topic to us. If it's privacy and cybersecurity or compliance related, we'll be happy to do a presentation. We just need a little bit more of a little bit more time to kind of create the materials for this. I'm kind of working on the application development and the privacy and cybersecurity considerations surrounding those. So if that's something of interest, it's not in here yet because it's still under development, but if that's something of interest, do let us know. There's a button in there in the website as well where you can request a specific topic, or you can email us at arc.support@ubc.ca. Also note that we do have cybersecurity sessions during our ARC summer school, and this typically happens kind of end of June, beginning of July. So keep an eye on our events calendar, and if you're subscribed to ARC mailing list, then these notifications would go to you as well. Okay, the next service that we have is the Information Security and Compliance Checklist. And you see in the screen there on the right-hand side, you have two options. You can do the interactive checklist or a PDF checklist. And really what this is, it's a self-assessment tool that you can use. For example, if you're developing an app and you want to know what UBC requirements you'll need to comply with based on your type of data and the components of your tool. This is a good self-assessment check for that. Or if you have a few tools that you'd want to figure out whether or not, are they in compliance, which tool would you like to use, which is in compliance with UBC standards, then this is a good tool for you to make use of. It's a self-assessment, so we don't go through it. We don't check it after you've done your self-assessment. But if you want us to kind of facilitate this, your responses in the tool, we can do so during a consultation. And we do consultations. So if you've got questions about, privacy and cybersecurity of a tool, what considerations do you need to think about? You can come to us with those questions and we can have a consultation about those. And we do consultations either in person, by phone, virtually, or we can even type it out. If that's what works best, that's fine too. And again, we respond to security and privacy questions. And when we do so, the guidance that we provide is based on the UBC policies, the standards, and best practices. Sometimes during a consultation, we might say you need a different service. Sometimes it might be an STRA or an SSB. And in that case, it's a good tip for you to kind of request the consultation early so that it gives you a little bit more of a lead time to do the things that you need to do or the things that you might want to do before starting or purchasing your tool. I mentioned SSP in that summary slide, and that is the Systems and Security Plan. And so when you submit a SSP request to us, what we would do is work with you to develop this document. And this document describes the current architecture of your research environment with the tool that you want to use, the processes and security controls that are involved in that environment. It also lists the individuals that are accountable and responsible for managing the environment or the different components of the tools that you are using for your particular research project. What it's not is we don't assess gaps. So we don't compare what's there to the UBC requirements. So we don't assess the gaps, and therefore we don't document the risk, and we don't provide recommendations. It really is just saying this is what's there. And when might you need it? So it's not mandatory, but unless it's requested. And so typically what we've seen with SSP request is researchers want to use controlled access data, for example, from the NIH. And so we would start the process with them and, developing this SSPs. And then that SSP goes to the Chief Information Security Officer at UBC, who then signs off in a test. And then that document goes to UILO/Innovation UBC, who will then work with you with your data access request to NIH. Sometimes when researchers work with some funders, and funders send you a document that's asking about security controls within the university. Not technically like an SSP template, but we would consider it an SSP, and we can also help you in responding to those questions. So feel free to reach out to us if ever you get those types of questions. And then our last service is the Security Threat and Risk Assessments, or STRAs. And so, as the name suggests, it's an assessment. So you use this to assess the cybersecurity risk of the research environment or the research tool that you are using. And so when you send us an STRA request, STRA intake form, we, like an SSP, document what's there: the architecture, the processes, the security controls, the accountable individuals. But then, because it's an assessment, we now compare what's there to the UBC requirements and look at the gaps. What's missing? How can you be in compliance with the standards? And based on those gaps, we also document the risk. And then we make recommendations so that you can improve or mitigate the risk and improve the security of your research information. What it's not a pass or fail. We don't say you can use this tool or you don't use this tool. We don't reject or fail based on the risk that we find. We merely do the assessment and document it. That being said, some stakeholders, and maybe you as well, might then decide, after looking at this document, whether you want to use the tool, whether the tool passes. And so, but it's not mandatory, but it is mentioned in the UBC information security standards. And with the STRA, I mentioned that, we don't pass or fail, but stakeholders might. These stakeholders might be your academic head of unit. They're accountable for the risk, and so they might decide this tool is too risky or it's not too risky. Or the REB. So if you submit an ethics application, sometimes if the tool is unknown to them, sometimes they'll ask you to come to us, and we might have a consult, and we might also have an STRA to determine that risk. Funders, data providers, health authorities, or even procurement might request an STRA from you. And when you do send us an STRA request, depending on your responses, on the type of data that you have or the type of components that are in the tool or the type of tools that you have, your research may fall within these three buckets, either an L0, an L1, or an L2. The L0 is, typically for research that has low risk information or tools that are low risk or known to UBC already. And in that case, once you submit the report, once you submit the request, you get the report within 10 minutes. It's pretty automated. To the right, though, you have an L2. If you've got some very high risk information, health type of data, and your tools are pretty complex, then it may fall into the L2 category, in which case we need to involve the vendor because we need to be, the assessment needs to be more in-depth. And in that case, the report generation may be in the order of months, depending on how quickly the vendor gets the information to us in order for us to be able to do the assessment. And so with that, our STRA tips for you then is to read the STRA information page. And that QR code there is for that information page. We published that this year so that researchers are able to know what to expect when they're in the STRA process. Next tip is start early. So, if it ever ends up in an L2, obviously it needs more time. So starting the STRA early. So typically, once if you're developing a tool, once you know the architecture of the tool, or once you know which tool you're going to be using for your research, that's a good time to start an SDRA. And then realizing as well that SDRAs are technical in nature. We need to know about the security controls of the system, because if we don't, then how do we know that your research data is safe, right? So the questions, although we try to kind of make it a little bit more layman's, there are some questions, a lot of questions in there that are technical. So it's important to involve your technical experts if you're working with a vendor, or your developers if you're developing the tool, as you go through the SDRA survey questionnaire, because there are technical questions in there. So let's move on to part 2. So I asked Nicole a month ago to see what kind of use cases, kind of general use cases, that you guys do within the department or within UBC. And we came up with these 4 options. I think we have time to discuss one of these. I see a chat.
The AI question.
Okay. Sounds good. So we'll go with the AI tools. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to talk about this slide, and then Scott is very much immersed into the AI world. So once I finish talking about the slide, Scott, if you can come in and also kind of add your thoughts about it, that would be fantastic. So we have storing or processing of data in web-based or AI tools. So what are the things that you need to think about? So when I think about these things, I kind of think about it in a data, people, tool, process kind of thing. So when we're thinking about data, what type of data are you trying to store or process in the tool, web-based tool, whether it's web-based or AI, doesn't matter. And what's the data classification? Low, very high. If it's health related, it's typically high, sorry, very high. If it's people related, high to very high. And then another question is, are you authorized to store or process this data in the tool? And so typically, if you're working with human related data, then this would come out in your consent forms or in your research agreements if you're working with secondary use data, or if you're working with a funder or a data provider, then whether the authorization to store within a web-based or AI tool is kind of noted in there. It's also important to know the data residency limit. If it's web-based, you don't really know where that data is going to be stored or processed. And so if there are limitations within your agreement or consent form as to where you're going to be, handling this data, then that's important to note. And data minimization here is kind of very important. If you don't need to have that data in the web-based tool or in the AI tool, don't put it there. Just something to keep in mind. Just put the data, or if it doesn't fit the purpose, if you don't need it in the tool, then don't put it in the tool. Use something else. As far as people goes, who can access the data within the tool? Again, this is something that's sort of listed or noted in your consent form or in your agreements as well. From a cybersecurity perspective, with the tool, is there an already existing approved tool? So UBC, as UBC researchers, you have access to some UBC tools like TeamShare, OneDrive. We've got Sakai as well. So is there something that's already been approved by UBC, either through either it's listed in the standard or it has already been reviewed through a PIA or a security review? Is there something that can help you there? If there isn't, and you really want to use this tool, then an SDRA would be a good service for you to use, because then we can look at the security controls that are associated with the tool itself and really dig deep in there. It's also important to know how the tool handles your data, especially, I guess it's web-based or AI. You need to know if they have access to your data once it's in the tool. What are they doing to that data? Are they sharing that data with other third parties, and who are those third parties? And how are they using that particular data that you have, if they are doing so? Sometimes this also comes out in your license agreement with them, especially if you're doing the click-through agreements online. And then I have here an AI consideration when you're looking at the tool. So currently at UBC, we don't have AI tools that are approved for use for high or very high risk information. And so if you want to use an AI tool for high or very high risk information, we suggest doing an SDRA. But also, one of the questions that I had was, what if you were using a web-based tool and then it went through an SDRA, and then later on, because AI is just everywhere, your vendor decides to add an AI capability within the tool or other capabilities. It doesn't matter whether it's AI or a different capability. You still need to know how that new capability affects the data that you have in there. What is it now doing once that was added? And so having that go through an SDRA would be a good recommendation, a good strategy for you. As far as processes goes, it's good to have an SOP to note how your data is going to be stored, what data is going to be stored, and who will have access to that stored data or processed data within the web tool. If you're having the tool, or if you're having your data in the web-based tool or an AI tool, it's good to have an SOP for backups. And also retention. How long do you reasonably foresee the data to be staying in the web-based tool? Ideally, you'd keep it there only until you fulfill the purpose of your project. If you can take it out of there and put it in a UBC system, that's great. If you need to keep it there, as long as it's reasonable and it fits within the purpose. But have that in an SOP so that everyone in your team understands what they should and shouldn't do. And that was my next point, awareness of what should or should not be processed or stored in the tool. Again, it's important to kind of classify your data, whether it's low, medium, high, or very high risk, and then know as well what type of data is allowed to go into this tool. And that's all I have in the slide. Is there anything else you would like to add, Scott?
A few things, also based on the chat. So I frequently hear people asking, what are the UBC approved tools? And in general, UBC doesn't approve tools. What happens is there's an assessment made. So a few people had asked about, is this tool approved or is that tool approved? I did post a link that the Privacy Matters website has posted, a PDF. It's not incredibly well publicized, which is unfortunate because it's really good information that talks about the tools that have been assessed. Copilot is the institutionally provided tool, but I am very reluctant to ever call anything Copilot because there's 3 different Copilots. So it really depends on which one you're using. The one that you should try to use as much as possible is the Copilot M365 or Copilot M365 Chat. Not everybody has access to the M365 Copilot because it requires a separate license and it's not provided by the institution. What most people have access to is Copilot M365 Chat, which has been only assessed up to a level of medium risk information. So if you're working with human data, health data, you shouldn't use it for that. If you have the additional license, M365 Copilot has been assessed up to high risk, but it's not as simple as saying, oh, then it's approved for high risk. It has been assessed against high risk data. That's what the PIA looked at. It still needs to be looked at from the ethics perspective or from your administrative head of units perspective as to whether or not they feel that's safe enough. So additional background specific to AI is that we are actually working on an information security standard for UBC that will cover AI and will answer some of these questions better. But I think one of the important things to look at, and this slide really kind of sums it up, when Jess was talking through it, the AI part of it really wasn't a significant factor from a cybersecurity or privacy respect, because AI is just software. And if you're using software provided by a third-party vendor, it doesn't matter too much what that software is. What's much more important is how they're going to handle and secure their software. So the big concerns with respect to AI right now are that it's going sort of fast and loose in the cybersecurity sense. Their main focus is speed and feature adoption rather than protection. And so it can be quite uncertain how well they're going to protect the data. And also, as Jess mentioned, people are sort of putting AI into everything, toasters totally unnecessarily, stuff like that. And you need to revisit your assessment of the tool every time they change what AI is getting added to it, which usually means some third party is getting access to the data. And that's how I normally interpret that. It's not the AI itself is just a software algorithm that does statistical predictions based on content. It's nothing fancy or nothing to be specifically concerned about. What's concerning are the third parties that may or may not be involved and then gain access to that data. So hopefully that helps as an additional summary. We're happy to answer more questions about AI. I know it's very topical. But I think the key takeaways that I usually try to make sure everybody understands is that it's just software, and a lot of what you should be worried about is who's running it, where they're storing it, where that data is going to go. Be aware that it's in a lot more stuff than you might realize. So a lot of browsers are integrating it. Some give you the option to turn it off, others do not. That's something else to keep in mind. Some of your tools that may not have had AI a week ago might have it now. Something else to keep in mind. So things are changing, and you kind of have to keep an eye on where things are going with respect to who might have access to your data. And then finally, yeah, that link shows the different tools. There are no tools currently at UBC that have been assessed for very high-risk data. The only two tools that have been assessed for anything other than low are the Copilot M365 chat and Copilot M365. And please don't shoot the messenger in terms of Microsoft's incredibly unfortunate naming choices. Yeah, a lot of people don't know which Copilot they're using most of the time. So there is a tip. If you're using one of the ones that has some sort of enterprise license agreement, there will be a little green shield icon over in the top right corner, almost always. If you pressed a Copilot link from your Windows machine or from another app, it's very likely not one of the enterprise safe ones. It's probably just the Copilot personal. Might be the M365 one, but it depends where you access it from. So the safest is always to go to the website, specifically ask for Copilot M365, and log in with make sure you've logged in with your UBC credentials. That's also very important. And then look for the green shield icon, then you know you're on the right one. There was another question in the chat. I'm going to jump to this quickly, Jess, about how do you know where to store data? And I wanted to provide a link in the chat to the ARC UBC storage finder, which tries to answer some of those questions based on, and the answer is largely, it depends based on your data set and your use case. The sensitivity of the information is another factor as well, of course, but the appropriate storage location to use for a collaboration that's involving a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets or comma separated value files would be very different from a collaboration that needs to store 100 terabytes of genomics data, for example. In the first case, If you've got sort of the smaller sized data sets, sort of traditional tabular type data, the SharePoint M365 OneDrive Teams storage is approved for very high risk information at UBC. It's a good place to store it. It provides easy collaboration access. It's not a backup, just as an FYI. If you need formal backup, you have to use TeamShare. But it's a really good place to do collaborations because it will also allow you to collaborate outside the institution, which so much of research is. So that's probably one of the best ones for the typical data sets. If you have bigger data or need special compute or high-speed transfers, this is actually a great thing you can come and talk to folks at ARC about. We can talk about the cybersecurity and privacy implications and considerations, but we have also our other teams that can talk about large data storage and where those should go, and the sort of computes and file transfers you might need if you're trying to ship, for example, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data to a different institution. So lots of options there. Hopefully that answers the question. I need to see who asked it, but I think it popped off the screen now. But if that didn't answer it, feel free to pipe up. Otherwise, I guess, Jess, we could
move to
move on.
cybersecurity hygiene. Yeah, wait,
Sure.
before we get there though.
Okay.
Yes, if you have more information, or if you would like more information about our services, yeah, go through our website. The link is there, or send us an email at arc.support@ubc.ca. And with that, I'm gonna pass the controls off to Scott so he can share the cybersecurity hygiene.
There we go. I think that's working. I will keep the chat open. Feel free to ask me a question there. I see there's one more. How do you get an M365 Copilot license as opposed to the just Copilot M365 or Copilot chat? I'm not 100% sure. I would speak with IT about that. I know they've been trialing it for some groups, but my understanding is there was going to be an additional charge, but I honestly am not sure. It's something I would reach out to UBC AT about. Probably the cool tech team are the ones I think who would be doing that. They look after a lot of the Microsoft stuff, but because we have an institutional agreement with Microsoft, it's not something I think you'd want to go off and do on your own. It'd probably be a lot cheaper to, and I think you have to integrate it with the UBC license. So that's something to talk to them about. All right. This slide deck, I'll just warn you, is very, very long. We have 20 minutes, a little less than that. We're not going to get through it, and that's not the intention. It's a slide deck that's got a reference, and I'll make it available, but it's got lots of different ideas and concepts. I also understand that when it comes to cybersecurity, people have different levels of technical background, different levels of comfort, and therefore we're all approaching it differently. I'm a cybersecurity geek. I've been playing with computers since I was 5, and I really like this stuff. If I start talking about something and use acronyms or phrases or concepts that are unfamiliar to you, please pipe up either in the chat or raise your hand or something and let me know that I've lost you, because if I've lost you, there's no point. But I will try to make it as broad as I can without boring the people that know the high-tech stuff already and without losing the people that are new to a lot of it. From a cybersecurity perspective, there's a really important general concept, and a lot of what we talk about is related to trust. We just talked about that extensively with the AI, right? Who are you trusting with your information? And I've got sort of an analogy of how this can very quickly extrapolate in modern technology. So I'm going to use the analogy of a ladder. Let's say I wanted to trust nobody but myself and get a ladder as a result. I could go into the forest, I could find the right tree, I could cut it down, I could mill the lumber, I could design the ladder. After learning how to do all this stuff properly, I could fasten it together, test it, store it safely, and then I would have a ladder. I didn't have to trust that anybody did anything wrong. It's entirely mine. Now, I don't think too many people are going to do that. Most people are probably just going to go down to the hardware store and buy a ladder. But the bit that you have to think about is doing that means I'm trusting a whole bunch of other people. I'm trusting that somebody who knew what they were doing picked the right wood that the ladder was designed properly. Hopefully that design was tested by somebody who knew how to test weight-bearing loads and such things. That when it was put together, the right fasteners were used, the right glues. I want to be sure that it wasn't broken in transport, that it was stored correctly and the wood isn't rotten. All those things I'm trusting, and that's a ladder. Now imagine how that works with modern computing infrastructure, networks, computer chips, where there's literally thousands of companies involved in delivering a service or a piece of hardware. So trust becomes very difficult in the cybersecurity sense, but it's the way that we should sort of base a lot of our thinking when it comes to these aspects of cybersecurity. It also has layers. There's lots of different layers. In cybersecurity, we actually call it defense in depth, and that means that we're going to attempt to provide different layers of protection for a whole bunch of different things. And by putting them all together, it actually makes us more safe than just doing one thing. There's really, and the same expression, there's no silver bullet to this. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do. The final other preamble bit, some of what's in this presentation are best practices. Is pretty much based on what happens at UBC. However, because we are in research and because we often collaborate, and sometimes you'll be working with a different institution or a different group, and they may have different policies and procedures. It's really important to always follow whichever policies and procedures apply. They may not be current industry best practice. That often happens. Some of the ones at UBC aren't. But all the procedures at that institution, all their processes and what the people have been taught and the way they respond are based on their policies and procedures. So even though it might not be current industry best practice, it's almost always the better thing to follow it because it might make you more secure just because everything else is assuming that that's the way something's going to work. And those assumptions fall into that whole trust bucket. So all the slides in this deck, there's two different kinds. One is a proactive slide. This is something you can do in advance to make yourself more secure. And I really just want to call attention to the bit in the top right that has this little graph. And it says how hard something is going to be to do, how much interference it's going to create in your day-to-day life, and how much of an improvement it will make in terms of your cybersecurity. And there's sometimes a bonus tip. The other main type of slide is a reactive slide, and this is something you can do after something has happened. It has a similar graph and talks about how technical you need to be in order to implement this particular suggestion. I put the resources up front so you can know that they're actually there in the deck. I'll probably cover, all the slides cover a variety of these things, so they're just sitting there so you know they exist. Okay, we can finally get going. So the first thing I always start with is one of the reactive slides. This is what do you do when something's gone wrong? I like it because it's not cybersecurity specific. It works in all aspects of life. So this is something you can do if you realize your house is on fire, something you can do if we've just had an earthquake, or something you can do if your computer screen suddenly goes blank. It works for all of them. And I actually learned it when I was volunteering at the Coast Guard. The acronym is SAPP. It stands for Stop, Assess, Plan, Proceed, and it's a way to address an incident. So anytime something goes wrong, the first thing you should do, rather than act while your body's got some level of adrenaline in it and you might not know all the facts, is to just stop, take a deep breath, don't do anything. Relax for a moment, let the shock dissipate, lets our brain calm down and we can think more clearly. And that gives you a moment to assess the situation. Look around, see what's happened, think about, what was happening just before this? Do I see anything else going on? Like my computer screen has gone blank, but the light has also shut off. Might be an indication of a power failure or something else. Maybe it's just the circuit breaker that went. That kind of information can help you when you get to your next step, which is to plan. When you plan something, you want to figure out what am I capable of doing and what should I do as the next step? So that's your plan phase. And again, if you think that the power has gone out, your next step could be, well, let's go check the circuit breaker versus something else. If you have a window that's popped up on your screen that says your computer's infected and you have to phone this number right away, your plan might be, actually, let me see if I can press Alt-Tab and get away from that to a different window, or let me see if I just reboot the computer, what happens, or if I disconnect it from the internet, what happens. That might be your plan. And then only once you have a plan should you actually proceed. So now you've taken a moment, the shock is gone, you know what's actually you're seeing, you've made a plan, now you can execute on that plan. And that whole process can take between seconds and minutes, depending on what's going on. And it's something that I know all first responders do, or should do, they're trained to protect themselves, really. You don't go rushing into a burning building without a plan. And that's the same is true for cybersecurity. Okay, so now I'll start diving into these slides. We'll stop when we get there, and then the rest of the slides are available to you. The first one I've added is actually a new one because it's coming up a lot. We talked about it a little bit, and that's AI extensions, but this is also browser extensions apply to it the same way. When you're working with a web browser, any web browser that has an extension in it, those extensions generally can see and interact with everything that's on the browser page. That's the way they're designed. They need to do that so that they can provide the functionality they want. For example, Grammarly. It can't correct your grammar on a web page if it can't access the words on the web page. But that means it can also see all your banking information and anything else that comes up in that browser. And this is true of any extension you add. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that browsers can change over time. So what you might have downloaded initially, or sorry, not browsers, extensions can change over time. What you may have initially downloaded to provide a color picker function or something as an extension may have been sold to a different company and now is collecting all the information off your web page and sending it to some nefarious entity. The improvement here is really about auditing what you've got installed in your web browser and thinking twice or thrice before installing more. Because extensions provide a very deep connection to the web browser, and that includes the AI extensions and AI browsers themselves, think very long before you start putting in new ones just to try, and or perhaps even use two browsers, one that you kind of experiment with and the other that you use for your more sensitive work. And audit your extensions. Do I still need the color picker that I've had for 5 years and haven't used for 3 of those 5 years? You can just turn it off or uninstall it. You can always add it again later if you are finding you're missing it. But the fewer extensions in a browser, the safer in general. And there's been a lot of examples of very nice little open source extensions that somebody developed who then got bored with it, moved on. Somebody said, hey, I'll buy that extension for $50,000. And they said, sure, sold the extension. And now a company who has no interest in the extension at all, they just wanted the fact that it was already installed in 1 million people's browsers, and they can now read everything in those 1 million people browsers. So they slowly changed the extension, which auto updates over time, and have access to everybody's info. So not to scare you about browser extensions, but I think a lot of people aren't aware of how deeply they connect with the content in the browser. And since so much of what we do today uses web browsers as the interface, it's really important to think about what the extensions in your browser can use. There's another slide later on in the deck that talks about using different browsers for different functions, and I'm a strong supporter of that. I have every web browser available installed on my computer. Because I use them for different things. When I'm using Copilot, I use Edge. When I'm using anything from Google, I use Chrome. My day-to-day browser is Firefox. When I want something a little different because Firefox won't work, or I'm trying to separate out what I'm doing at the Alliance of Canada versus UBC, I might use Brave. And when I'm doing hobbyist stuff, I'll use Opera. So it separates all my identities into those different things, and I can then put different extensions into different browsers as I might need them. So something to think about. And I'm watching in case questions pop up. Feel free to interrupt me anytime through this. Another one that's very applicable in the research context is shared folders. I've talked about collaboration a few times already, and that's very common. And what happens, we'll generally have a folder, we'll share it with some people so we can collaborate. That's fine, good, and expected. But over time, people may come and go. Access to those folders may no longer be appropriate for everybody who was originally granted it. And one thing you should get in the habit of doing is auditing your shared folders to see, A, is the information in this folder still appropriate for the people who currently have access? Should the people who currently have access, do they still need it? Should they still have that access? Is the information even needed by the project? And perhaps if it isn't, then that information can just be deleted, because one of the safest ways to prevent information from being breached is to not have it there in the first place. It sounds really simple, but it's a common area that we all fall prey to, the digital pack rat nature of our lives, storing information, and then we're on to the next thing and we forget that it's still sitting in that folder. And if it's sensitive information, that's not a great place for it to be. I see Marjorie is agreeing. Yes, home versus work mode is another very important one. Separating your work and personal identities can be really important. Another one that's important from a research perspective is backups. I mentioned briefly that the OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, and I describe it like that because the files all end up in the same bucket in the end, but you can access them through those different interfaces, isn't actually a backup. There's no backup of that service. And maybe to make that clear, understanding what a backup is important. A lot of the cloud-based services have either high resiliency or sort of a disaster recovery level of protection. What the cloud services generally do is they'll store the data in multiple data centers, but they're not technically backing it up, which is where you take a copy of the data and store it somewhere else. That's not what they're doing. They're having copies that are simultaneously synchronized. So if I make a change to a file on SharePoint, all those copies immediately get that change. If I want to go back to a previous version, they do some snapshotting and versioning, but it's not really a backup where you can go, I'd like to go back and get all my files from a week ago, which you can do with a traditional backup. I know a lot of research groups do back up their data. One of the most important things to do if you are doing that, though, is to have some sort of a plan to restore it, preferably to test that. I consulted with a group several years ago that was backing up everything diligently every night to a network-attached storage device on their desk. They were very proud of their backup, and I asked when they had last checked it, tested it. They said, oh, we haven't do that. Let's go look. The backup was completely empty. It had been happily not backing up anything for 3 years because they'd never checked. And what had happened was the backup had been configured slightly wrong, or a folder was moved or something, and it was backing up an empty folder. So in the end, the ability to restore the backup is almost more important than the backup itself. If you can't restore it, it's not of much use. I kind of talked about this one. It seems almost a silly, easy protection, but it applies across the board. And I should note, all of these tips are equally valid for you at home versus what you might be doing at work or in a research project or in any group, anything associated with cybersecurity. If you have unnecessary information stored in a place and it doesn't need to be in that place, delete it from that place. It's a thing that's, I'm on a working group at UBC called Retention Automation, where they're working to automate some of this, because it's hard for us as humans to remember to go back and clear out the old trash that we may no longer need. But it's also important to keep in mind that as a public institution, a lot of the information we work with on a day-to-day basis is available under Freedom of Information requests. And we're required to keep records for certain periods of time. There's record retention, but outside that time, we really should get rid of the information we no longer need, because once it's gone, it's no longer subject to a Freedom of Information request. And I don't know if anybody here has ever had to do one. I've had to do a couple where it's quite a bit of work to go back and find all the information about a specific topic if you're not sure where that information is or how long it's been sitting in a particular place. And these are not always necessarily nefarious. Like, it's not somebody searching for something bad. There's perfectly legitimate reasons why FOIs happen. They can often happen in litigation cases, but they can also just happen out of interest or from the press or media. If you have files dating back 15 years that don't need to be there and you get an FOI request, you have to make a reasonable effort to go back through all that information and see anything that might relate. If you only had files dating back 1 year, it's a little bit easier. So that's something to keep in mind. But from a cybersecurity perspective, I usually put the caveat stored in a particular place. So if you've been sharing files on the SharePoint site, with a collaborator. The project is now no longer doing that. It's not necessary. You still probably need to put the data into a repository somewhere. So I'm not saying you should just delete all the data. But if it doesn't need to be in that shared folder on SharePoint anymore, deleting it from that location is really, really good. Now, I know we've got 3 minutes left. I can cover one more thing, but I wanted to give one more chance for any questions, or if we're tight on time for any reason, or Nicole, if you needed to make any announcement before we finish. Not seeing anything? Okay, let me do this last one. It's usually what I start with. It's why is it so important to always have a different password for absolutely everything, which for a lot of people sounds daunting. I'll try to explain what the big deal is with that, and I'll come back to the slide at the end. So why is it such a big deal to have different passwords? Let's take an example. I have the same password on a whole bunch of different services. Most services nowadays, you log in with your email address and a password. So I've just been lazy. I've got this password that I've memorized. I think it's really good. And I've made it really, really long and use all these complex characters and stuff, which by the way, is no longer best practice to use complex characters. So I have it on service A, and service A gets breached. Something happens, somebody gets into it, they get all the usernames and passwords. And what do you get? You get that email from that service that says, out of an abundance of caution, we've reset your password. Don't worry, everything's okay. We've secured our systems, and it's all good now. And so now they can't use the username and password they stole from that service to get into it anymore because the password's been reset. Great. What's happening in the background, the people who stole those credentials have now posted or sold them online to a whole bunch of other bad people. And this can happen within hours of when they're taken. And within a few more hours, whoever bought or downloaded those stolen credentials is automatically trying them on every single other service they can think of. Those services haven't been breached, so they did not reset their passwords, and they did not send you an out of abundance of caution email. They're just happily going along and seeing people logging into their service. They have no idea that now it's nefarious bad people who have stolen credentials that are logging in. If I've used the same password all over the place, I just got owned. And that's one of the key reasons to have a different password in all different places, because if one gets breached, you're still protected everywhere else. This kind of attack is called password stuffing or password spray attack. And you can sometimes see these online. There are protections against it, like multi-factor authentication, which is one of the reasons why it's so popular. But that in and of itself is just a speed bump, as our CISO would say. It helps, but it's not the end of the story. So if you want to see more about this, there's a website, Have I Been Pwned? You can put in your email address and it will tell you all the places where your password may have been breached. But the key thing is keep a different password as many different places as you can, and you'll need a password vault in order to keep track of all those. UBC recommends both Bitwarden and KeePass. It's in a couple of places, and I know we're at time, so I'm I'm stopping here. Have a great day, folks.